At a naval base nestled along the coastline, life moved at its usual pace. The salty breeze carried whispers of camaraderie and discipline, but beneath the surface, tension simmered like an unattended pot on low heat. Among the officers stationed, there was Lieutenant Mark Harris, a man whose reputation preceded him in ways both infamous and troubling. To some, he was just another face in uniform, but to those who worked closely with him, Harris was a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. Harris had always been difficult to work with. His sharp tongue and quick temper made interactions with him uncomfortable, especially for those who dared to cross him or challenge his opinions. Over time, stories about his behavior began circulating among the ranks. How he would snap at subordinates over minor mistakes, how he often complained loudly about inefficient leadership, and how he seemed to have little regard for rules when they didn't suit his mood. But what truly set Harris apart was something deeper, more insidious: his prejudice. It wasn't something he tried particularly hard to hide. In casual conversations during breaks or late-night gatherings at the barracks, Harris frequently let slip remarks that left others uneasy. He'd make snide comments about certain ethnic groups, question whether people of color belonged in positions of authority, and even joke about stereotypes as if they were harmless banter. At first, many dismissed these remarks as offhand quips, perhaps fueled by frustration or ignorance. But as the months went by, it became clear that this wasn't mere carelessness. It was a pattern. What made matters worse was that no one ever called him out effectively. Some senior officers heard rumors about his behavior but chose not to intervene, believing it was better to avoid rocking the boat. After all, Harris was competent in his duties, and addressing such issues could stir up unnecessary drama. Subordinates, meanwhile, feared retaliation if they spoke up. Who wanted to risk angering someone with power? So instead of confronting the problem head-on, everyone tiptoed around it, hoping it would resolve itself. But unresolved problems rarely disappear. They fester. And in Harris's case, his unchecked attitudes grew into something far more dangerous. His disdain for authority figures reached new heights whenever he interacted with Commander Elena Rodriguez, one of the most respected leaders at the base. A seasoned officer known for her strategic brilliance and unwavering dedication, Rodriguez commanded respect from nearly everyone she encountered. She was also Hispanic, which, unfortunately, became a focal point of Harris's resentment. To Harris, Rodriguez represented everything he disliked about modern military culture. Here was a woman, a minority no less, who had risen through the ranks based solely on merit, earning accolades and promotions that he believed should have gone to more deserving candidates, namely, himself. Every time she gave an order, every time she led a successful operation, Harris felt a pang of jealousy mixed with bitterness. He couldn't understand why someone like her held so much influence, and rather than examining his own biases, he doubled down on his hostility. This animosity simmered quietly for months, manifesting in subtle ways. During meetings, Harris would roll his eyes whenever Rodriguez spoke, muttering under his breath about political correctness and favoritism. When assigned tasks directly by her, he completed them begrudgingly, often dragging his feet or finding excuses to delay. On several occasions, colleagues noticed him glaring at Rodriguez from across the room, his expression a mix of contempt and thinly veiled rage. Yet despite these warning signs, nothing was done to address the growing tension between them. The situation took a darker turn when Harris started drinking heavily. What began as occasional nights out with fellow officers soon escalated into frequent binges, leaving him irritable and unpredictable. Alcohol loosened his inhibitions, amplifying his worst traits. Conversations that might have stayed civil turned venomous, and his already shaky grasp on professionalism slipped further away. Those closest to him noticed the change but hesitated to step in, unsure of how to handle the volatile combination of arrogance, prejudice, and alcoholism. One evening, after yet another round of drinks at a nearby bar, Harris stumbled back onto the base, reeking of liquor and radiating hostility. It was late, and the facility was quiet, save for a few personnel finishing up their shifts. As fate would have it, Commander Rodriguez happened to be overseeing operations that night, ensuring everything ran smoothly before retiring for the evening. Clad in her crisp uniform, she exuded calm authority as she walked through the compound, unaware of the storm brewing just around the corner. For Harris, seeing Rodriguez in that moment was like pouring gasoline on smoldering embers. All the resentment, jealousy, and bottled-up frustration came rushing to the surface, clouding his judgment completely. This wasn't just another routine encounter. It was the culmination of years of suppressed anger and prejudice. Unbeknownst to anyone present, the stage was set for an explosive confrontation that would shake the very foundations of the naval base. Little did anyone know, this seemingly ordinary night would go down in history, not for heroics or triumphs, but for exposing the ugly truth lurking beneath the polished exterior of military life. The humid night air clung to everything it touched, wrapping the naval base in a sticky embrace that made even breathing feel heavy. Lieutenant Mark Harris stumbled along the dimly lit pathways of the compound, his boots dragging against the pavement with each unsteady step. His uniform was slightly disheveled, and the faint smell of alcohol trailed behind him like an unwelcome shadow. The combination of intoxication and simmering resentment painted a dangerous picture, one that no one could have predicted would spiral so quickly out of control. As Harris wandered aimlessly, his thoughts churned like storm clouds ready to burst. Every slight, every perceived injustice replayed in his mind on a loop. He muttered under his breath, words slurred and venomous, as if trying to convince himself of something he already believed, that the world owed him more than it had given. And then, rounding a corner near the operations building, he saw her, Commander Elena Rodriguez. Rodriguez stood beneath the glow of a flickering security light, her posture upright and commanding despite the late hour. She held a clipboard in one hand, reviewing notes while occasionally glancing at the nearby monitors set up for nighttime surveillance. Her presence exuded calm authority, a stark contrast to Harris's chaotic energy. To anyone watching, she looked every bit the consummate professional, sharp, focused, and unflappable. But to Harris, she represented everything he despised about the system he served, a system he felt had failed him. At first, Harris hesitated, caught between instinct and impulse. Part of him wanted to turn away, to avoid any interaction that might expose the turmoil brewing inside him. But another part, the darker, angrier part, refused to back down. Instead, he straightened himself as best he could, squaring his shoulders in an attempt to appear sober and composed. Then, without warning, he approached her. "Commander," Harris said, his voice thick with sarcasm. "Still burning the midnight oil, I see." Rodriguez glanced up from her clipboard, her expression neutral but alert. She recognized Harris immediately, not just by sight, but by reputation. Over the years, she'd heard whispers about his behavior, his outbursts, and his thinly veiled disdain for authority figures like herself. Still, she chose to respond professionally, unwilling to let his tone dictate the nature of their exchange. "Lieutenant." "Harris," she replied evenly, her voice steady and measured. "What brings you here at this hour?" Harris smirked, though there was no warmth in it. "Just taking a walk, Commander. Clearing my head. You know how it is." Rodriguez nodded politely, turning her attention back to the clipboard. She didn't want to engage further unless necessary. Her priority was ensuring the smooth operation of the base, not indulging Harris's antics. But Harris wasn't satisfied with being ignored. Something inside him snapped. He couldn't let the moment pass without making his feelings known. "You know," he began, his tone shifting from casual to cutting. "It's funny. Some people seem to rise through the ranks faster than others. Makes you wonder what they're doing differently, doesn't it?" Rodriguez froze for a fraction of a second, her pen hovering above the paper. She knew exactly where this was going. Still, she maintained her composure, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. "I'm sure hard work and dedication play a role, Lieutenant," she responded coolly. "Is there something specific you'd like to discuss?" Her calm demeanor only fueled Harris's anger. He stepped closer, invading her personal space in a way that was both aggressive and deliberate. His eyes narrowed and his lips curled into a sneer. "Hard work? Dedication? Is that what you call it? Or is it just connections? Maybe playing the diversity card helps too, huh?" The words hung in the air like poison, sharp and undeniable. For a brief moment, silence enveloped them, broken only by the distant hum of machinery and the occasional chirp of crickets. Anyone witnessing the scene would have felt the tension radiating off Harris like heat waves on asphalt. Yet Rodriguez remained unfazed, meeting his gaze with steely resolve. "That kind of talk isn't productive, Lieutenant," she said firmly, setting the clipboard aside. "And it certainly has no place here. If you have concerns about your own career progression, I suggest addressing them through proper channels, not by making baseless accusations." But Harris wasn't listening anymore. The alcohol coursing through his veins amplified his emotions, blurring the line between thought and action. He scoffed loudly, shaking his head as if disgusted by her response. "Proper channels? Oh, come on, Commander. We both know how things really work around here. It's not about merit. It's about checking boxes and pandering to agendas." Rodriguez took a deep breath, her patience wearing thin but still intact. She understood the gravity of the situation. Engaging in a shouting match wouldn't solve anything. Instead, she opted for clarity and professionalism. "Lieutenant Harris, I'm ordering you to stand down and return to your quarters. You're clearly not in the right state of mind to continue this conversation." For a moment, it seemed as though Harris might comply. He hesitated, his shoulders slumping slightly as if weighing his options. But then, something shifted, an almost imperceptible change in his demeanor. His jaw tightened and his hands balled into fists at his sides. The anger bubbling within him reached a boiling point, and before either of them realized what was happening, he reached for his holster. The metallic click of the safety catch echoed in the quiet night, slicing through the tension like a knife. Harris pulled out his service weapon, holding it loosely in his trembling hand. His movements were erratic, fueled by a toxic mix of rage, intoxication, and unchecked prejudice. The sight of the gun sent a jolt of alarm through Rodriguez, but she forced herself to stay calm, knowing that panic would only escalate the situation further. "Put the weapon down, Lieutenant," Rodriguez commanded, her voice firm despite the knot of fear forming in her stomach. "This isn't the way to handle whatever issues you think you have." Harris laughed bitterly, the sound hollow and menacing. "Oh, don't act like you care, Commander. You've never cared about people like me. All you care about is climbing higher on your little pedestal." Witnesses who happened to be nearby froze in shock, unsure of what to do next. Some instinctively backed away, fearing the worst, while others scrambled to find help. One young sailor quietly slipped away to alert military police, his heart pounding as he relayed the urgent message over the radio. Meanwhile, Rodriguez kept her focus squarely on Harris, refusing to break eye contact. "This isn't about me or you, Lieutenant," she said, her tone softening slightly but still authoritative. "It's about doing the right thing. For yourself, for the people around you, and for the values we're supposed to uphold. Please lower the weapon." But Harris wasn't listening anymore. His vision tunneled, consumed by a cocktail of emotions he couldn't, or wouldn't, control. In that moment, all rational thought abandoned him, leaving only raw, unfiltered hostility. As the seconds ticked by, the standoff grew more intense, each heartbeat echoing like thunder in the charged atmosphere. No one could have predicted how far Harris would go that night, or the ripple effects his actions would create. What started as a chance encounter between two officers had spiraled into something far darker, exposing cracks in the foundation of trust and discipline that held the naval base together. And as the distant sound of approaching footsteps signaled the arrival of reinforcements, one thing became painfully clear: nothing would ever be the same again. The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to choke on. Commander Elena Rodriguez stood her ground, her eyes locked onto Lieutenant Mark Harris as he held the gun loosely in his trembling hand. The weapon wavered slightly, its barrel pointed, in her direction but not steady enough to suggest deliberate aim. Still, the mere presence of the firearm sent waves of fear rippling through anyone who witnessed the scene. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was a powder keg waiting to explode. Rodriguez's mind raced, though her face betrayed none of the turmoil brewing inside her. She had trained for high-pressure situations like this, scenarios where split-second decisions could mean life or death. But nothing in her years of service had prepared her for something so personal, so raw. Harris wasn't an enemy combatant or a hostile intruder. He was one of their own, a fellow officer sworn to uphold the same values and principles she cherished. And yet, here he was, drunk, armed, and spewing hatred that cut deeper than any blade. "You don't want to do this, Lieutenant," Rodriguez said again, her voice calm but firm, like a lighthouse beacon cutting through a storm. "Think about what you're doing. Think about the consequences." Harris sneered, his grip tightening around the gun. "Consequences? Oh, I know all about consequences, Commander. You and your kind always make sure people like me get punished while you skate by without lifting a finger." His words were slurred, disjointed, but the venom behind them was unmistakable. It wasn't just anger driving him. It was resentment, jealousy, and a lifetime of unchecked biases bubbling over into chaos. To Harris, Rodriguez wasn't just a superior officer. She was a symbol of everything he believed was wrong with the system. In his clouded state, he couldn't see past his own bitterness to recognize the absurdity of his accusations. Rodriguez took a slow, deliberate step backward, raising her hand slightly to show she posed no threat. Her movements were calculated, designed to de-escalate rather than provoke. "Lieutenant, listen to me. Whatever you're feeling right now, whatever you think is unfair, we can talk about it. But not like this. Not with a weapon involved." For a fleeting moment, it seemed like Harris might hesitate. His breathing grew heavier, his chest rising and falling rapidly as if struggling to keep up with the emotions raging within him. The gun dipped slightly, its muzzle lowering toward the ground. Hope flickered in Rodriguez's heart. Perhaps reason could still prevail. But then something snapped. Harris's expression darkened further, his lips curling into a snarl. "Talk? That's all you ever do, isn't it? Talk, talk, talk. Meanwhile, nothing changes. People like you keep climbing higher, leaving the rest of us behind." He raised the gun again, his hand shaking violently now. The motion drew gasps from the few witnesses nearby, their faces pale with terror. Some had already fled, seeking help, while others remained frozen in place, unsure whether fleeing would escalate the situation or save their lives. Rodriguez knew time was running out. If Harris fired, even accidentally, the damage would be irreversible. "Mark," she said softly, deliberately using his first name to humanize the moment. "I'm not your enemy. None of us are. We're on the same team. Whatever pain you're carrying, whatever anger you feel, it doesn't have to end like this." Her words hung in the air, fragile and hopeful, but Harris wasn't listening anymore. His focus had narrowed to a single point, her. To him, Rodriguez wasn't a person. She was a target, a representation of everything he despised. The alcohol coursing through his veins distorted reality, turning rational thought into irrational fury. Every second that passed increased the likelihood of disaster. From the corner of her eye, Rodriguez noticed movement. Military police officers were approaching cautiously, their weapons drawn but not aimed. They moved silently, careful not to startle Harris further. One of them signaled for backup while another whispered urgently into a radio. Reinforcements were coming, but they weren't close enough yet. Until then, it was up to Rodriguez to keep Harris from crossing the line. "Put the gun down, Lieutenant," she repeated, her tone unwavering despite the knot of fear tightening in her stomach. "You're better than this. Don't let anger control you." Harris laughed bitterly, the sound hollow and unsettling. "Better than this? You don't know me, Commander. You don't know anything about me." "That's true," Rodriguez admitted, taking another small step back. "But I know what happens next if you pull that trigger. Do you really want that weight on your conscience? Because once it's done, there's no going back." Her words seemed to pierce through the haze of rage, if only momentarily. Harris blinked, his grip on the gun loosening slightly. For a brief instant, doubt flickered across his face, a crack in the armor of his hostility. But just as quickly, it vanished, replaced by defiance. "You think you can scare me?" he spat, his voice rising. "You think I'm afraid of you or your rules? Let them come. Let them see what happens when they push someone too far. The arrival of the military. Police changed the dynamic. Their presence forced Harris to shift his attention, dividing his focus between Rodriguez and the newcomers. He swung the gun wildly, gesturing at the officers now forming a loose perimeter around him. "Stay back," he shouted, his voice cracking under the strain. "Don't come any closer." Rodriguez seized the opportunity to take another step, away, putting more distance between herself and the weapon. She kept her hands raised, her posture non-threatening, as she continued speaking in measured tones. "It's okay, Lieutenant, just lower the gun and we'll figure this out together. No one has to get hurt." But Harris was beyond reasoning now. His paranoia grew with each passing second, feeding off the adrenaline surging through his body. To him, the world had shrunk to a single, suffocating space where everyone was against him. The MPs were closing in, their disciplined movements a stark contrast to his chaotic energy. Panic began to creep into his demeanor, evident in the way. His eyes darted frantically from one face to another. One of the officers stepped forward, his voice calm but authoritative. "Lieutenant Harris, please put the weapon down. We don't want anyone to get hurt." Harris wheeled around, pointing the gun at the newcomer. "Shut up. Stay out of this." The standoff stretched on, each second feeling like an eternity. Sweat dripped down Harris's forehead, mixing with the alcohol-induced flush spreading across his face. His breathing grew erratic, his movements jerky and unpredictable. The situation was spiraling dangerously out of control, teetering on the brink of catastrophe. Rodriguez knew she had to act fast. With a final desperate attempt to reach him, she spoke directly to Harris, her voice softer now, almost pleading. "Mark, please. Think about your family, your friends, everyone who cares about you. Is this really how you want them to remember you?" Her words struck a nerve. For a split second, Harris hesitated, his resolve faltering. The gun dipped lower, its barrel now aimed harmlessly at the ground. It was a glimmer of hope, a chance to defuse the situation before it escalated further. But hope is a fragile thing, easily shattered. As reinforcements closed in, Harris's panic returned in full force. He tightened his grip on the weapon again, his eyes wide with desperation. The moment of clarity slipped away, replaced by a primal instinct to fight or flee. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the stalemate ended. A commanding voice rang out sharp and clear. "Drop the weapon, Lieutenant, now." Harris froze, caught between surrender and defiance. The choice he made next would determine not only his fate, but the lives of everyone around him. The command echoed through the tense night air, sharp and unyielding. "Drop the weapon, Lieutenant, now." It came from one of the military police officers who had taken charge of the situation, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. Every syllable was deliberate, leaving no room for misinterpretation or hesitation. The officer's presence commanded respect, even in such a volatile moment, and his words carried the weight of authority that could not be ignored. Lieutenant Mark Harris froze, caught in the crosshairs of his own making. His grip on the gun tightened momentarily, as if resisting the order purely out of instinct. But the reality of the situation pressed down on him with crushing force. He was surrounded, flanked by armed MPs whose weapons were trained on him, their expressions grim but resolute. Behind them stood Commander Elena Rodriguez, her face etched with a mixture of relief and concern, though she remained steadfast, despite everything. The spotlight was entirely on Harris now, and there was nowhere left to run. For what felt like an eternity, Harris stood motionless, his chest heaving as he struggled to catch his breath. His mind raced, torn between fight and surrender. On one side there was defiance, the primal urge to lash out, to assert control over a situation that had spiraled wildly beyond his grasp. On the other, there was fear, gnawing at the edges of his consciousness, whispering warnings of the consequences awaiting him if he chose the wrong path. The alcohol clouding his judgment made it nearly impossible to think clearly, yet the gravity of the moment began to sink in, piece by agonizing piece. "Lieutenant," the commanding MP repeated, his tone firm but not hostile. "You're outnumbered. Here, put the weapon down and we can resolve this peacefully." Harris glanced around, his eyes darting from one officer to another. Each face bore the same expression, calm determination mixed with a hint of pity. No one looked at him with hatred or malice. Instead, they seemed almost sorrowful, as if they understood how far he had fallen but were powerless to stop it without intervention. This realization hit Harris harder than any physical blow could have. For all his bravado, for all the venomous words he had spewed earlier, he suddenly felt small, diminished by the enormity of his actions. Slowly, painfully, Harris lowered the gun. His hand trembled violently as he extended it outward, placing the weapon on the ground with exaggerated care. The metallic clink of steel against pavement reverberated through the silence, a sound both final and haunting. It marked the end of his rebellion, the moment when he acknowledged defeat, not just to those surrounding him but to himself. As soon as the gun left his hand, 2 MPs moved forward cautiously, their movements precise and measured. They secured the weapon first, ensuring it posed no further threat, before closing the distance between themselves and Harris. One of them spoke softly, offering reassurance. "That's good, Lieutenant. You've done the right thing. Let's take it step by step." Harris nodded numbly, his shoulders slumping as the adrenaline drained from his body. He allowed the officers to guide him away from the scene, his legs wobbling beneath him like a puppet whose strings had been cut. As they led him toward a waiting vehicle, his gaze briefly met Rodriguez's. There was no triumph in her eyes, only a deep sadness that spoke volumes about the toll the incident had taken on everyone involved. With Harris in custody, the immediate danger passed, allowing those present to exhale collectively. The tension that had gripped the naval base began to dissipate, replaced by a somber awareness of what had just transpired. Conversations erupted in hushed tones as personnel processed the events, piecing together fragments of information to form a clearer picture. Some expressed disbelief, unable to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the image of someone capable of wielding a weapon against a fellow officer. Others voiced anger, frustration, and disappointment, their emotions raw and unfiltered. Commander Rodriguez stayed behind to oversee the aftermath, her leadership skills kicking into high gear. She instructed several junior officers to assist, the MPs in documenting the scene, ensuring every detail was recorded accurately. Evidence markers were placed around the area where Harris had stood, preserving the location of the dropped firearm and any other relevant items. Security footage from nearby cameras was reviewed, capturing multiple angles of the confrontation for future analysis. Though exhausted, Rodriguez refused to leave until she was certain the investigation would proceed smoothly. Meanwhile, news of the incident spread rapidly throughout the base. Word traveled faster than official reports, fueled by whispers and speculation among those eager to understand what had happened. Some recounted witnessing parts of the standoff firsthand, describing Harris's erratic behavior and the palpable fear in the air. Others relied on second-hand accounts, adding layers of interpretation that sometimes strayed from the truth. Regardless of accuracy, one fact remained undeniable. Something unprecedented had occurred, a breach of trust so profound that it shook the very foundation of the institution. In the hours that followed, senior leadership convened an emergency meeting to address the fallout. Base commanders, legal advisors, and representatives from internal affairs gathered in a secure conference room, their faces grave as they discussed the implications of Harris's actions. Questions swirled. How had things escalated to this point? Why hadn't warning signs been addressed sooner? What steps needed to be taken to prevent similar incidents in the future? Rodriguez attended the meeting, her role shifting from victim to key witness. She recounted the events leading up to the confrontation, providing a detailed account of Harris's behavior and the sequence of decisions she had made during the standoff. Her testimony was clear, concise, and devoid of embellishment, reflecting her commitment to transparency and accountability. When asked whether she believed Harris intended to harm her, she hesitated before answering honestly. "I don't know what he intended," she admitted. "But I do know that his actions put lives at risk, including mine, and that cannot be tolerated." Her words resonated deeply with those in attendance, reinforcing the urgency of addressing systemic issues within the ranks. Several leaders acknowledged that Harris's behavior had been flagged before, albeit in less severe contexts. Complaints about his attitude, comments deemed inappropriate, and instances of insubordination had been reported but largely dismissed as isolated incidents. In hindsight, these red flags formed a pattern, one that should have raised alarms long before the fateful night unfolded. As dawn broke over the horizon, casting golden light across the naval base, a sense of resolve settled over the community. The events of the previous evening had exposed cracks in the system, revealing areas where improvement was desperately needed. Leaders vowed to implement changes, promising stricter oversight, enhanced training programs, and greater support for individuals affected by discrimination or misconduct. For many, this marked the beginning of a journey toward healing and reform, a chance to rebuild trust and reaffirm the values that defined their service. Yet amidst the calls for progress, one question lingered in the minds of everyone involved. What would become of Lieutenant Mark Harris? His fate rested in the hands of military justice, which promised swift and impartial action. While some hoped for leniency, believing rehabilitation was possible, others argued that his actions warranted severe punishment. Whatever the outcome, one thing was certain. Harris's choices had altered the course of countless lives, including his own, in ways that would reverberate for years to come. The days following the incident at the naval base unfolded like a storm after its initial lightning strike, chaotic, charged, and filled with aftershocks. Lieutenant Mark Harris, now confined to a holding cell pending investigation, became the center of an inquiry that reached far beyond his personal actions. What had started as a single explosive confrontation quickly spiraled into a broader examination of conduct, accountability, and the systemic issues lurking beneath the surface. Military. Investigators wasted no time diving into the case. Their first step was to gather testimonies from everyone who had witnessed or interacted with Harris in the lead-up to the incident. This included enlisted personnel, fellow officers, and even civilians who frequented the same bar where Harris had spent much of his evening before the altercation. Each account painted a fragment of the larger picture, revealing patterns that many had overlooked, or perhaps chosen to ignore. One recurring theme emerged almost immediately. Harris's behavior hadn't come out of nowhere. Over the years, numerous complaints had been filed against him for inappropriate comments, discriminatory remarks, and aggressive outbursts. Some colleagues described how he would mock minority officers during training exercises, questioning their competence under the guise of constructive criticism. Others recalled instances where he openly mocked cultural traditions or used derogatory language when discussing diversity initiatives within the ranks. These weren't isolated incidents. They were threads woven together into a tapestry of toxic behavior. What shocked many was the sheer volume of reports that had gone unaddressed. Several junior officers admitted they had hesitated to escalate their concerns, fearing retaliation or being labeled troublemakers. One sailor recounted how he had once reported Harris for making racist jokes during a briefing, only to be told by a superior officer to let it slide because Harris was considered a valuable asset in tactical operations. Another shared how she had been advised to avoid working directly with Harris after complaining about his dismissive attitude toward women in leadership roles. The cumulative effect of these unresolved grievances created a culture of silence, allowing Harris's behavior to fester unchecked. Commander Elena Rodriguez played a pivotal role in the investigation, offering her perspective not just as the victim of Harris's actions, but also as someone deeply committed to fostering positive change within the institution. During interviews with internal affairs officers, she spoke candidly about the challenges faced by minority leaders in predominantly homogeneous environments. She acknowledged the progress that had been made over the years, but stressed that more work remained to be done. "I've always believed in leading by example," Rodriguez explained during one particularly poignant session. "But sometimes, no matter how hard you try, there are barriers that can't be broken alone. People like Lieutenant Harris aren't born. They're shaped by attitudes and behaviors that we allow to persist. If we want real change, we need to confront those underlying issues head-on." Her words resonated deeply with the investigators, who began expanding their scope beyond Harris's individual misconduct. They delved into the policies governing workplace conduct, examining whether existing frameworks adequately addressed discrimination, harassment, and prejudice. What they found was troubling. While guidelines existed on paper, enforcement often fell short due to inconsistent application and lack of accountability measures. Officers tasked with handling complaints frequently prioritized operational efficiency over interpersonal conflicts, leaving victims feeling unheard and perpetrators emboldened. Public attention added another layer of complexity to the situation. Word of the incident leaked to the media, sparking widespread outrage and debate. News outlets ran stories highlighting Harris's actions, framing them as symptomatic of deeper problems within military culture. Social media platforms buzzed, with reactions ranging from condemnation to calls for reform. Hashtags like accountability in uniform and dark-end military bias trended, drawing attention from advocacy groups and lawmakers alike. Advocacy organizations seized the opportunity to push for systemic changes, urging the Department of Defense to implement stricter anti-discrimination policies and provide better resources for reporting misconduct. Spokespersons emphasized the importance of creating safe spaces for marginalized individuals serving in the armed forces, arguing that true equality required more than just representation. It demanded respect and protection. Amidst the public outcry, Harris's fate remained uncertain. Legal experts weighed in on potential charges, speculating that he could face multiple counts, including threatening a superior officer, violating firearm protocols, and engaging in racially motivated harassment. Military tribunals were known for their rigor, and given the severity of the allegations, few doubted that Harris would escape consequences entirely. Yet opinions diverged on what form those consequences should take. Some argued for rehabilitation, suggesting that Harris's behavior stemmed from ignorance rather than malice and could be corrected through education and counseling. Others insisted that leniency would send the wrong message, undermining efforts to hold individuals accountable for discriminatory actions. As the investigation continued, the naval base itself underwent subtle yet significant shifts. Leaders took proactive steps to address the cracks exposed by Harris's actions. Mandatory training sessions on unconscious bias and cultural sensitivity were announced, with attendance required for all personnel, regardless of rank. Anonymous reporting systems were introduced, ensuring that individuals could voice concerns without fear of retribution. Base commanders held town hall meetings to encourage open dialogue, inviting feedback from service members about how to improve inclusivity and morale. For Commander Rodriguez, these developments offered a glimmer of hope amidst the turmoil. Though she carried emotional scars from the encounter, she refused to let bitterness define her experience. Instead, she channeled her energy into advocating for meaningful reform, using her platform to amplify voices that might otherwise go unheard. Her resilience inspired others to speak up, fostering a renewed sense of unity among those determined to build a better future. Yet even as progress unfolded, questions lingered. Could one man's actions truly serve as a catalyst for lasting change? Or would the momentum fade once the headlines quieted and public interest waned? As the naval base grappled with these uncertainties, one truth stood undeniable. The events of that fateful night had forced everyone to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and the institution they served. And while the road ahead promised challenges, it also held the promise of growth, if only they had the courage to walk it together.